So, dear friends, thank you so much for joining this policy brief launch. Our opening words will be said by Sasha Pippinger, who is the team lead of USIP, US Institute for Peace, Inclusive Peace Process and Reconciliation team. Sasha, over to you.
Thanks, Antti. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone that's joining us today. I'm representing U.S. Institute of Peace, as Antti mentioned. I lead our Peace Processes team, which covers mediation, dialogue, negotiation, and reconciliation, most importantly today. And back in 2019, USIP forged a collaboration with the Mary Hoch Center for Reconciliation from George Mason University's Carter School. And together our institutions convene a community of practice for reconciliation practitioners. And our institutions did so because they shared the belief that reconciliation is absolutely a linchpin to sustaining peace, but that the space was right for some new thinking and some different thinking. And in the years since then, we've convened literally hundreds of practitioners to really try to provide some scaffolding and some space to promote this new thinking. And one thing that became very clear from these exchanges between the frontline practitioners was that we need to look much more closely at this question of insiders in the reconciliation equation. And my predecessors at USIP had the wisdom to invest in that research years ago, before really it had become a buzzword in this field, and to really empower experts and insiders themselves to start digging deeper and to really understand the current and potential impact that they could play in this space. And we at USIP, we've been using the research as a foundation for our direct practice. And my colleague, senior expert in reconciliation, Carl Stauffer, along with the Mary Hoch Center and Think Peace, have been working alongside UNDP and the European Union to convene an insider mediator community of practice with a global scope. So I think what I'll just say is it's really not lost on any of us that we're living through a period in this world with just a deep sense of urgency and this acute imperative, right, to help bolster peace processes with everything we've got in our sort of proverbial peacemaker and peace builders arsenal. And we need that new and creative thinking more than ever before. And we also recognize that the sort of relentless engine for peace is always run locally, and that local actors are going to be the center of gravity for these processes. So on behalf of my team at USIP, we're just super delighted to support this launch and help amplify this research and spread the word on what the research has shown about how to best support insiders in their efforts. So in sum, I think we're in for a really fantastic briefing today. I'll add my voice to Antti's and express my appreciation for those that are going to offer their perspectives to us today. So Tecla Wanjala, our former chair of the Kenyan Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission, and Liz Hume, presidents of Alliance of Peacebuilding, and Rosarie Tucci, who's an emeritus member of our USIP family and the founding director of our Peace Processes team, but currently serving at USAID as the Director of Democracy, Human Rights, and Governance. Now I'll pass back to you, Antti. Thanks.
Thank you, Sasha. And I just want to say to you and the whole USIP how important the work is that you do, that there is this institution that closely works with peace builders and stays in touch with them and connects them with policy. And it's a struggle because the distance is huge, and especially you and your team are doing that in really beautiful ways. So thank you for those efforts. And thank you everybody for joining. It's a really honor, and we're absolutely thrilled to share some of these findings. I'll just give a little bit of a background, kind of my own journey towards this space is that I got started in track one peace mediation in 1999 with our former president, Martti Ahtisaari, who was then mediating the Kosovo peace process. And just a couple of years earlier, John Paul Lederach had introduced the concept of insider mediators with an idea that perhaps insiders have more insights and ability to actually operate within the parties, and they could offer us an alternative to the diplomats that often didn't know what was going on or didn't have the skills to do something in a limited time and space. And then we moved forward with Martti Ahtisaari to establish one of the early private mediation entities, CMI, which is one of the leading entities today, just after the HD Center in Switzerland. But all of that was centered around competing for the mandates. Like everybody wanted to be the mediator, the hero or the actor who brought the parties and did some miracles and got an agreement, and then it was done and the pictures were taken. But as we know today, that didn't work. These peace processes were failing. And when we look today, the mandates are not effective. Like UN Security Council is divided. It doesn't give effective mandates if there is even a peace process existing. So in this time of turmoil and incredible suffering, it is such a relief to know that there are still insiders. There's always insiders operating, and they're super powerful. They know what to do, but they're not often recognized. And it's a very difficult job. It's often hugely demanding, requires a lot of sacrifice, and in many cases, extremely dangerous. So that's why this research has been so valuable. We've been building on those community of practice that Shasha mentioned, but then USIB believed in us that we could do some in-depth research. And my dear colleague, who is just about to join State Department, Nicholas Sherwood, he launched preparations for this research in our lab, and did the IRB. We got with USIP, Humanity United, to fund it, including the Helsinki Darkness Institute that was funded by the Finnish Minister for Foreign Affairs, and then the Mary Hoch Foundation also contributed to the research. But the basic assumption was based on a revelation that I had when I was observing this peace process from track 1 to track 2 and in between and track 3, is that there was an obsession on a mediator. But when you look to the real life, what needs to happen within yourself and between the parties, that's where the hard work is. And so the intention was to just help to shift some attention to what needs to happen within the conflicting parties and between them. And this is a space where the insiders are particularly effective. But then you have to ask that, is the method that the insiders use really mediation? And therefore, is the term insider mediator accurate to describe the agency and the effort? And while talking to the insiders, we realized that that's not true. So that's where we came up with this title that we have been proposing through the research, is to call them Insider Reconcilers. Reconciliation itself is very difficult and complex, but at the same time very poetic and beautiful. And it opens the sphere of interrelations and your own healing that has to be embedded. So my first takeaway to all of you is that consider Insider Reconciler as a term. And we've done some groundbreaking research, we believe, in collecting the evidence and the insights from the current leading Insider Reconcilers, how they view that. So I'll just very quickly, a couple slides and then move into just talking about the recommendations. So this policy brief is part of 2 policy briefs. We will have the launch of the second policy brief on the end of this month, 29th. So please continue there. That will be focusing on the well-being and supporting the well-being of the insiders. You can see the supporting organizations on the right. But I really wanted to bring this picture here. Tecla is there in the center, and we'll soon hear from her. And there is Wanamisi Soleimani, who works with incredible program in the coast of Kenya that has been helping 3,800, if I'm correct, young people to disengage from violence or survive in those very difficult situations in their own healing journey. And then Rhoda Ollard was one of the few clinical therapists advancing mental health in Somalia. So these are examples of a few of the insiders that we have been interviewing. The timeline is there. Here is the current numbers. So these were in-depth interviews. It has taken a lot to process them. And so we're still working on that, and we'll be publishing an academic journal paper this year about it. But 41 from 21 countries, you can see that they're quite highly educated. But this is also because we wanted to focus on those who have a lot of experience. And I did just capture the recommendations from the first policy brief, but I'll stop sharing because I don't think it's readable anyway. So let's come back to seeing each other. So just a couple of words about the recommendations. So first is that all of those who work with insiders, they have to continuously. So I'll just say first that there will be some technical ones and then some insights. So this first one is a technical. So we shouldn't think that the relationships we have determine who are the effective insiders. So a professional way is to continuously reach out and rethink who they are, but not just on your own. It's good to be in a continuous dialogue with insiders so that we understand who have the credibility and the influence on those issues that we want to work on. The second technical point, which is really principled as well, that we have to do this work in a way that we don't co-opt or try to own insiders, but respect their independent agency. And that's extremely significant for the sustainability of the effort, because one day the money will run out, the logos will be taken down, but the insiders will remain. And if we have co-opted them into our organizations, they're likely going to nice career on international organizations and leave the spot. But if you want them to be effective on what they do, which has been their heart's calling, is to find ways to create innovative ways of funding their efforts in a sustainable way. I'll come back to that in later on. But then also the insiders, they really benefit from peer support, peer learning, peer dialogues, even on well-being and mental health. That's really effective. So we often overpower them with our technical skills and ideas, but when they speak with their peers, they get the insights, what's really functioning and working. On process design, it's really significant that we move behind, on this era of decolonizing aid, that we plan a program, get funding for it, and then we monitor how we implement that pre-plan. That is not the way this should work. The donors should understand that there should be flexibility and understanding that the plan has to change based on the ownership of the insiders. If we spend a lot of money involved with insiders in the planning, I don't think that the money goes in the right place either. So it's good to go with the good idea, share the ownership, and have the insiders then rethink and replan it. And actually, we should believe that will be so much better. So multi-year funding is significant, but allow flexibility to rethink it and refocus. That's very significant. And here comes one significant insight that came from the research, is that healing has to be as an ingredient there. It has to be on an individual level. Like, it's so significant for the individuals own thinking what the process can become and what to do with their own community and others, that they themselves are on a healing journey. So involving some trauma awareness, some information that helps you understand what's going on in your own mind and body is so significant. But then also healing within the subgroups, because if we don't allow that healing to happen, how can they, just an individual group, provide a contribution for a credible process design, and then between the groups in a way that they can trust to do the process design together. So healing has to really be embedded in all of this, and we'll speak more about that on the January 29th launch. Finally, on the flexible funding, which I just mentioned, a lot of these credible insiders that we interviewed, they operate either alone or with the very small NGO that don't qualify for the calls, and very rarely get the funding that goes there into the bigger organizations. Of course, bigger organizations have individual partners that are really effective, but that is not perhaps the most effective way of using resources. And so I would urge the donors to work collectively in a way where there's more flexibility for small-scale funding, where if someone survives with a small grant, spending 75% of your time into planning and reporting doesn't make sense. So how can those funds be given to insiders in a way that we understand that it's from hand to mouth? I know a lot of these insiders are helping people in other ways. So I think we should just be bold enough to understand that the accountabilities we have in our governments and our societies doesn't necessarily need to apply into small-scale insiders. But I'm really thrilled to have my really close dear friends and colleagues, and actually my heroes on this call commenting on this, who were the early ones to actually believe that this approach made sense. So really beautiful to hear from you as you are listening and reading the outcomes, what you see. The first speaker will be Liz Hume. She's the president and CEO of the Alliance for Peacebuilding. So yeah, Liz, you've looking this overseas and here in the US, and then you've been really significantly advancing policies, including the Fragility Act. So thinking about this concept and what we are recommending, does it make sense? And how do you see this fitting in the different policy space? Liz, over to you. And Tecla, we're going to take you after Liz.
Well, thank you, Antti, and thank you for this work. why is this work so important? I always say research to practice to policy to standards. And one of the biggest problems we have in the peace building field is we don't have standards. We don't have the agreed upon standards. We have this incredible research that's out there. And every time there's a peace agreement or some sort of peace process, we keep doing the same things over and over. You know, at the highest level of foreign policy, thinking that we're going to get a different result, you know, and you don't have to go back further. Just think what happened in Sudan or Afghanistan or the peace agreement or the peace work that goes into it, right? And for so many years, it was track 1, track 2, track 3, track 1.5, and everybody has to go back and look at the diagram. Even I do, because I forget what it is sometimes. So how do we simplify that? And I think that's what you're really talking about here. And how do we get this into practice? And then again, back to those standards. And that I think is the most important piece of it. When I was working at USAID many, many years ago, putting together some of these indicators and standards, I remember people at the State Department would say to me, we do this, we do the peace process. I'm like, yes, and all this work has to go in behind the scenes for years, forward and backward and after the peace agreement. It doesn't just happen. And I know that from experience. I was a legal counsel for the OSCE in Bosnia. And one of the things I was tasked to do was to try to implement the Dayton Peace Accords. Yes, it stopped the violence, but the agreement were made by at the very top. And so what we know this now. We know when women are included. We know when, you know, at different tracks, the communities are involved. We know community processes, peace processes happen at, you know, each level. This is what is needed. We know the research, it backs it up. Antti, this research 100% backs this up. But now we need to make sure that it gets into policy, practice, and standards so that when you have work going on in Sudan, for example, or, you know, name your country, you know, you're not told to, you know, go away because we have to stop this fighting and we're going to, you know, make the agreement between X, Y, and Z. That's why, for example, the negotiation support unit at the State Department, AFP, has been such an incredible supporter and fan and begging Congress for funding. We want to make that unit mandatory, for example. And that's the type of work that uses this research to make sure that when these processes are happening at the very early stages, that the best research gets used. But I'm going to just say this again. We need standards. We need something like the humanitarians have with the sphere standards. Because right now we go to say, well, the research says, da, 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 right? And then, so what? Nobody has to listen to it. So that's why this is so important, but why it is so important, why it has to get into policies and standards, why this research is so important, why the negotiation support unit is so critical at state, why the work that USAID is doing and what they fund and this development process, and also going into the Global Fragility Act. You know, we pushed really hard for that 10 years. We also really pushed hard for the locally led in there. It doesn't mean that, you know, international organizations are kicked out of the process. It means locally led, that they're the ones that live there. It is their conflict. It is their issues. They know what works best. And so that really is where the locally led. And I just want to say one other piece that you mentioned, the healing, the brain science. We know very little about the brain, but we know a lot more. And your work Antti, has really been leading this. Mari Fitzduff, who was at Brandeis, wrote an incredible book on this. There's a lot of really incredible people working in the peace building field beyond conflict that are trying to make the intersection between conflict prevention, peace building, and brain science. Our brain has a lot more to do with this than we think, right? Going back into the caveman brain and how we see the other. And this is all interconnected and part of it. So the work that you're doing, Antti, on all these different levels is so vital. But again, I'm just going to close and say research to policy to practice to standards. And then we have to hold the people that are doing this work and funding it accountable, because we get a lot of prevention promises, but then we don't get the accountability. So with that, I'm going to stop. And I really look forward to hearing my other colleagues.
Thank you, Liz. That was amazing. And I just want to say that you've been leading, you've been doing exactly what you said. Like, if I recall correctly, the Fragility Act was accepted in the Trump era with the bipartisan support, or at least you got a bipartisan support for it, which at the time in a very divided Congress was like a miracle. So that speaks into your abilities, but also kind of the spaces that do exist when things and the standards and policies are advanced and discussed in a really professional way. So thank you for that. Tecla Wanjala is one of our living heroes. I have to say that up front. What she did with the Kenyan Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission was just no short of a miracle. It was a commission in crisis. Its chair had to step aside because having been claimed or found to be involved in atrocities himself. And then Tecla was given a task to fix it without having the support, even, perhaps few other commissioners, but she did it. And not only did that, but I think what defines her being a hero of our time, in my view, is that she felt that she personally is accountable for the people who shared their pain, and basically without any resources went into one of the most difficult hotspots, Mount Elgon, where continuously violence was erupting. There was a lot of incredible violence, mutilations, killings, slaughter. And if you look the last Kenyan elections, it was peaceful. Nothing else has changed that than the healing circles that Tecla, with the other people who understood the power of communal healing, social healing, did that. So I just want to say, Tecla, this up front, that thank you for everything you do, and we're so honored just to know you and work alongside you, but also happy that you came to comment from your perspective, if this makes sense, and what would you say also to the policies and standards discussion. So over to you, Tecla.
Please just allow me to maybe switch off my video because of the network problem here, so that I can try to communicate. Thank you. First, I would like to thank Auntie Hannah, and I can see Nick there. Great people who have been journeying with us and who have recognized the work of Insider Reconcilers in contributing to not just preventing conflict, but continuing to intervene in situations of conflict, in supporting social healing among communities emerging from armed conflict. And I would like to thank you for this great policy draft paper. I hope that really is going to influence, it's going to guide the actors in the area of conflict transformation. Today, I'll not speak so much as someone who coordinated the commission, or who spearheaded the commission during difficult moments. But each time, I think where I got the strength from, as Auntie said, I think I got it from working with the communities at the community level, where I just wanted our tears that we had shed for so long to be affirmed on this commission. That is where I got the strength from. Now, talking about Insider Reconciler and the importance of this policy, first, I would like for us to recognize that in situations of conflict, especially armed conflicts, the first respondents are usually leaders based in the region where such a conflicts take place. Before the international comes to support, they will have ensured that the situation is a little bit okay. But when you are there, you have nothing else to do but just to intervene. And such a leaders may have intervened because they are there, they may have seen the early warning signs. Or if the conflict has degenerated into violent confrontation, they are the ones to offer first relief to the victims. And such a leaders, I must also say, that may not necessarily be peace builders, because peace building is very new. When I intervened in our armed conflict 30 years, this was a terminology 30 years ago. This is a terminology that we not understand. There are usually community leaders working in other professions such as social development, teachers, nurses, or even pastors. And they are usually the first respondents. They are usually first respondents because they are part of the community in conflict, and maybe also even part of the conflicts. So they know the issues very well, very well. And it's also because as the shoe wearers, they are usually feel the pinch of the conflict when it comes to the impact. Their family members may have been found in the crossfire during such a conflict. So our work as Insider Reconcilers is not so much driven by money, how much you may want to get in terms of salary, but no, it's because of the pain that we will have experienced, our communities will have experienced during that conflict. And based on the experience during the intervention, most of us, in fact, come in just to serve as volunteers, because your community is hurting. You'll always do what you can to support the situation so that to stop that pain. So it's not so much about how much we may want to be paid. In fact, if we are paid at all, it's usually the minimum. I mean, just the salaries are not the really basic salaries that we may get such. And as I said again, during such situations, most of us started intervening in situations of conflict with our local knowledge. We came in to acquire skills in conflict transformation or conflict prevention later in life. But what we used is just the local knowledge, understanding what now I'm calling them root causes because I've been trained in that, what the issues of conflict are, what the root causes are, what the relationships are, and that is what drives our intervention. And the beauty of using the local knowledge in responding to conflict is that it's the situation that guides us. You intervene with the bare minimum, but then you are guided by the situation from one point to the next. So that's where we are coming as Insider Reconcilers. I'm emphasizing that we are within the community. We understand the situation, even with the bare minimum. At times, in the absence of anyone else, you have nothing but to come in and support that situation. But we've really, based on my experience, we've really struggled. At times, you may hit a point where you want to continue, but even with that bare minimum, you may need funding from elsewhere for you maybe to move the next situation. You may start from one village, but you may need to travel to the next village. You may need to transport people in conflict to a safe area. In such situation, you may need funding to get them to a safe area for them, even now to start discussing or continue with the negotiations. So what areas do we need in support as this policy drive draft has highlighted skills enhancement. With skills enhanced, when I intervened in the first conflict, I didn't know the terminology like mediator, but I realized later that I was mediating, that I was facilitating negotiation. I had bare minimum, but later when I now got support to train, then I knew in depth what mediation is, what negotiation is, and where there is stalemate, what needs to be done. So these are some of the skills that we need to support. I've also said that reconciliation is an effort, and reconciliation needs to be facilitated. So we need to be supported to facilitate reconciliation. And for those of you who are in peace building, you know how long it takes to broker peace. Reconciliation is a journey. It's not an activity. In fact, peace building are not activities, but they are initiatives. So we may need partners who are patient enough to journey with us as we journey with the people in conflict or communities in conflict to support them. We have people who depend on us also. So as much as we volunteer, we shall appreciate if our efforts are enumerated well so that we can focus now, not where am I going to get the next meal, but if I got some little salary, I would be able to focus now on supporting the communities even more. We need to be supported to network, to share experiences and knowledge, to learn from each other. When I was intervening in the conflict in Mount Elgon in early 1990s, I felt so isolated until when I attended a national umbrella that I met other women, the late Deka Ibrahim from Wajir and the late Rose Barmasai from Rift Valley. And when they shared their stories, I felt encouraged. I went back to the community re-energized because of the experience they shared. I realized that I was not alone. Another area that we need support is journeying with victims of armed conflicts. As is it Liz mentioned? It's a journey that is very difficult, and I remember at one point I went down with vicarious traumatization. And so why did I go down with vicarious traumatization? Because once I didn't understand that this work I was doing might impact on me. So even just awareness creation in the area of trauma healing is very important. I came back from the field, but I had nobody to talk to. If I had a way where I was receiving debriefing sessions, maybe I would not have gone down with vicarious trauma. And we've also realized that there is a relationship between unhealed trauma and our community being embroidered in the vicious circles of conflict. So apart from reconciliation processes, we need the actors at the community, the Insider Reconcilers, to be aware that even the people that are support, they themselves can go down with vicarious traumatization, but the people that are supporting, they are also traumatized. Look at what is even happening at the international level. When our leaders, for example, in South Sudan go to negotiate, really, where would they be negotiating from? Having gone through decades of armed conflict in their own communities, maybe they themselves are also traumatized. So trauma is an important aspect. So I think I just want to again say that we are very, on behalf of community Insider Reconcilers, we are very grateful to this policy draft. We hope that it's going to bear fruits and we shall be supported more for us to support reconciliation processes in our communities, which is a journey that it's a long-term journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tecla. This was so brilliant. And just imagine the richness of the material like that Tecla shared in just 10 minutes. And if, we would have had a chance to talk with her a couple hours and then transcribe it and have the evidence. So whoever is considering to do your thesis or dissertation, there is a wealth of knowledge in our data bank now. And so do please get in touch with the Carter School. Sorry for this advertisement. Anyway, Rosarie Tucci is the final commentator, and then we'll go for Q&A. And I just want to say, in my view, Ro has one of the most difficult jobs, and I'll a little bit describe that because she's in the middle of the taxpayers and the politicians who are sometimes or quite often quite populist, but still in power to make decisions. She is entrusted with a lot of resources that have to be used effectively. At the same time, the world is in a fire, and she meets with the people and understands their needs. And so just juggling between those institutional demands, the political demands, the accountability, that's tuned to perfection almost in the USAID, and knowing by your heart what needs to be done, it is an impossible job. But I don't think there could be anyone better than you, and I can just speak about that experience. We still embody, your culture and spirit in the USIB PPR. I can tell that. So we try to get things done. We try to fix the problems. We try to stick together, and that's the spirit you led with. So thank you, Ro. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Antti. Well, thanks for those kind words, but thank you for kickstarting this research and seeing it to this point. Obviously, the policy briefs are critical for us. As Liz said, how do you move across that spectrum from research to policy practice and eventually standards? Liz, I look forward to the day we get to standards because that is exactly how you do hold us accountable. Let me just make a couple of comments at the onset. It does feel like, even Antti, when you started this research, we are in a better place at USAID in particular in terms of understanding two things. One, the importance of prevention. And that's why we now have the Conflict Prevention Stabilization Bureau, CPS, which is really dedicated, to focusing on prevention. And what I love that you put in this policy brief is that, reconciliation, healing, these are efforts that you do at any point in the conflict cycle. And so moving away from this linear concept of reconciliation, the sequential approach where it happens at the end, I think that in and of itself is a real insight that we have to keep pushing, banging the drum on, and reminding our colleagues and turning that reminder into practice, right? And so, at any point in a conflict, looking for those entry points. And that's, in fact, the point of the Insider Reconcilers, to help us identify those entry points that we ourselves are like, no, it's not ready for this. We're not ready for this. And they're telling us, no, we've got a moment here that we have to capture. Let's give it a go. So I think that preventative lens, that looking at the whole cycle lens, that we have to continue to beat the drum on that. I also think we're in a unique moment. Antti, we were just talking about this before, that USAID is really embracing this locally led mission, and not only embracing it, but understanding what it really means to shift power, to shift, decision making. And so I think what you're seeing is a lot of what's in this report. It aligns very well with the efforts we're making in development more broadly, to really build on existing systems and networks, to look at, how we can be more supportive of iterative processes and iterative programming, and less reliant to these strict timelines and determined outcomes. Obviously, that's going to take time. You don't want to overpromise on how you move an institution like aid, but I think you're hearing real authenticity from our colleagues and really creative thinking from some groups like Local Works on how they're doing it and how they're training others in the agency to do that. And then you're seeing a lot more focus. I could speak from our experience developing Powered by the People, which is an effort to help support movements. You're seeing a real focus on our role as creating connections, like Tecla said, networks and connections, and looking at our role as providing the space to do programming, as opposed to determining what that programming is. And so you see us trying to move more towards a facilitator role, or I think, Antti, you call it like the support structure. How do we become a support unit as opposed to, determining the programming? And so I think you're seeing that movement, and I think it aligns exactly what we see in this policy brief. Just a couple other quick points that really stuck out to me. Obviously, you're seeing this locally led movement happening in a lot of different areas of development, but in this area, it even feels more critical. And Antti, you spoke a little bit about this. The independence required for these inside reconcilers. I mean, there is no other industry that type of independence is probably more critical and more consequential, right? The stakes are just really high for these actors. And so I think we just, again, to beat the drum on, I don't want to take away from the other development spaces, but to say, when you're building trust and trying to create a shared, future, that independence is paramount. And so just would want to highlight that. And Antti, you said that it can't be co-opted, can't be owned. And I just want to, spotlight that comment. Another, just to go back to the process design, I mentioned iterative process. I really appreciate the way you framed experiment and testing, right? So it's not, I think the way I used to look at it was we have to embrace failure, misfires, but perhaps they're not failures and misfires. They're part of the process to get to where you need to go. And so embracing experiment and testing, I think is a really inspiring way to frame this work. Tecla, you said we need patient partners. Like, so I think that's something we're going to have to adjust in our minds. This incremental process concept, managing our expectations of what progress looks like. I think that I don't think we're there yet on that. I don't know, Liz, maybe you could correct me if you think our government colleagues. Okay, she's nodding her head. I think I've got that accurate. We have to embrace that a little bit better. There's a lot of risk associated with this work. I think we have to become more accepting and comfortable with risk, and really look at this language of experimenting and testing and see that as part of the process and progress, right? One step forward, two steps back. That's absolutely acceptable, right? That's what it's going to take because of the complexity of the mission at hand. I'll just end on two more points. One actual area that I think is worth exploring a little bit more is the role of intermediaries. And this is something I think we're understanding better in the movement space, that there are these intermediary groups, the professional NGOs, that do actually have a critical role to play here. That whether it's helping with the financial management or the reporting, or acting as a facilitator themselves. And so I would just say maybe look at that area, see if there's some useful takeaways, because I think that's what's helped with this funding issue. How do we get the money to these informal actors that are not formal NGOs, that don't have the right setups? We've actually found these NGOs as an intermediary, and NGOs in the movement space that really understand movements, right? That understand how to get funding to movements and are not just passing down the reporting requirements, right? Like, that's not what we want. We don't want you to just hand off the burden to these informal actors. We want you to maybe figure out how to take on that responsibility so that the actors can continue to do their work. The inside reconcilers can continue to do their work. So that's one maybe area we can explore together a little bit more. And even in that Powered by the People, you'll see that maybe the reporting requirements, we're looking at maybe more video reporting, things that are more appropriate for these actors, that are not as time consuming, that are lend more to their creativity and their experiences rather than, the written report in English that we've required, for so long. And so we're really trying to embrace that. The very last thing I'll say, and so we can leave time for Q&A. My world does straddle democracy, human rights, and governance, and obviously this conflict resolution prevention space. I would love to see more merging of these spaces, and I think in your brief, you mentioned that what we're looking at is in these spaces that the Inside Reconcilers are working in, how do we define inclusion, justice, and fairness? And obviously that's the bedrock of democracy, and which will kickstart, these societies' efforts into not kickstart, reignite, renew conversations around democracy. And so I'd love to see how the DRG space, as we call it, democracy, rights, and governance, can really embrace and support Inside Reconcilers' efforts to help define these concepts of inclusion, justice, and fairness, and help to do what we mentioned before, create this just, nonviolent, shared future that the different communities and societies can have together. So let me pause there. I had a couple other comments, but I want to be conscientious of time and can jump in at any point if needed.
Thank you, Ro. Absolutely brilliant, beautiful. And I think exactly that merger that you finally mentioned is highly relevant in pre-election, post-election violence prevention, which, Kenya was a perfect example. It directly links in the functionality of democracy and the trust in the governance and the systems. And we'll be thrilled to come to do a broad background at USAID if you think that would be of interest to your colleagues about the briefs. Friends, we got some time for Q&A. This space is being held by two colleagues, Deborah Sakir, who is our Associate Director at MHCR, and Hannah Adamson, who leads our lab. Has there been something in the chat, Deborah and Hannah? Any questions that you see, or you can raise your hand, unmute. Now is the space to ask. Welcome. And while we see those questions coming, one thing what I was thinking is that, like, we've been trying to think how this iterative process of healing could actually be built in an early phase, and the map we've been planning is like recognizing those individuals who want or are playing the role and experimenting with them what the healing means in terms of interpersonal, communal, and the process level, incubating some of those elements, and then coming back with the process design leading to programming. So it would be beautiful to test or pilot in some of the cases where this kind of recognition, pulling the individuals to that healing space that Tecla was calling for, and the peer support matching together, understanding how the trajectory changes when you realize that healing can actually happen through this process, and incubating, testing that within the group and maybe with your intra-group and then between, and then coming with the program planning that is then submitted to the donors. Like, I wouldn't imagine that to cost more than 50,000 in one context. And if you think about, let's say, Sudan or other cases, like how incredibly powerful that might be in terms of the output and recommendations. And even if it's done in non-specific, like, organizational space, it could be an insider space that's being facilitated by different organizations. And what we are looking at MHCR as a potential research topic is that if this is being done, how does that change the trajectory of the repetition of the cycle of the conflict? And so that's our dream of next research phase. But do we see questions?
Absolutely. So we have a question in the chat from Rebecca. I am very interested in the standards or lack thereof in peacebuilding and reconciliation. Are there currently standards for progress? If so, what do they look like? And if not, what do you wish they looked like?
Amazing. Not an easy question. So who wants to answer? Liz, do you want to go?
Sure, since I brought it up, we've worked really hard in terms of putting together standards for evidence. I will say this, in the peace building field, we have gotten a lot of pushback just on that, for example. A lot of people think we are exceptional in what we do. And as I tell people, if you don't have resources, you can't do it. One of the reasons why the Global Fragility Act came about is because when we were going up to the Hill, and this was under the Obama administration, they would tell us, if you can't show us that it works, that you're preventing conflict, and then why should we fund it? Our budgets got raided to electrify Africa, et cetera, et cetera. And that is why AFP has been pushing so hard for evidence-based standards, for example. So that is one piece of it. That is building the capacity of peace-building organizations to be able to do it, but pushing the funders to actually fund it and to demand it. Again, it's a cycle of accountability. Now that's one piece of it. But the second piece of it is standards and practice. And I'll go back and say, look, I'm not saying we have to have this humanitarian sphere standards book. If any of you all have ever used it, I've used it out in the field. You can look up and say, okay, the tents have to be so many feet apart, but we're not saying that. But we know a lot more than we require donors and or organizations to do. We have a lot of data out there. We're not good at sharing it. And we're not good at holding ourselves accountable as an industry, if you want to call it that way. And I'm going to give you one other example. One of the worst places I'm seeing it happen right now is in the United States. I'm calling it kind of the Wild West out there. Overseas, we have USAID, we have the UN, you have other donors that are like, look, we're never going to fund that. We know that the research doesn't back that up. That's crazy. But right here in the United States, we have people coming up with good ideas that we know don't work because we've seen the research overseas. So what we really need is something sphere standard like. There is an incredible organization that's been started up in Geneva that AFP is working really closely with, P4P, that's really focusing in on standards. And one of the areas that they're focusing in on the most is on peace processes, for example, as just a start. So that's my goal, for the next decade. Actually, that coupled with the fact that we need to integrate peace building and conflict prevention into all the different sectors, humanitarian, climate change, health, truly integrated. And that could also be put in as part of the standards. And if we do these things, that will push and advance and build the peace building conflict prevention field more than anything. And it has to be done. Why? Because budgets are going down significantly across the globe, from the Swedes, from the, you could go on and on and on and on and on. And more importantly, because a lot of what we're doing isn't working. And we keep doing the same thing over and over again. As I was telling Antti and Ro earlier, my husband is in the health field. And sometimes he's like, I can't believe you guys get away with what you do, right? You don't publish on it. You don't. And so we have to hold ourselves accountable as, in theory, an industry. And that's really my hope and my goal. That could push us forward in the next decade. And more importantly, why? Because since 2018, we have hit record violent conflicts before Ukraine, before Gaza, before Ethiopia, before COVID, before the numbers are going up. And we have the data, thanks to the Fund for Peace and the Institute for Economics for Peace for the last 20 years. We know this. It doesn't mean we throw everything out, but it means we have to innovate and do things differently. And that's why this research is so important.
Thank you, Liz. I think just to honor the timeline, I'll just say the closing word, and I see Anne Phillips having her hand up, and I'm happy to stay and just to have a chat on your question and after we close this formally and the recording. So if that's fine, and hopefully, just wanted in closing to say my gratitude to Sasha and Liz and Tecla and Ro for coming and giving those incredibly insightful comments, but also for the work you do. And this is an ongoing joint effort. I also want to thank again the donors of this research, USIP and Helsinki Diaconese Institute, with the support of Finnish Minister of Foreign Affairs, who provided a long-term frame to dive deep and iterate those findings, as well as Humanity United and Mary Hoch Foundation by advancing the findings to this policy brief level. The next briefing will be on the 29th from 10 to 11:30. It's a hybrid, so if you're in DC area, we'll be meeting at the Humanity United office, but you will have a access online as well. Melanie Greenberg, Director of Humanity United, will open it, and we'll have Nick Sherwood present the recommendations, and then Rhoda Olat and Mika Sari from UNDP providing their insights. Like you know, Nika and UNDP has been advancing MHPS's guidance note and has a lot of insights and perspective to provide. Thank you, Deborah, Hannah, and Mahira for your help, and wonderful to have you all. We can close now the recording, and I'll stay and to discuss if you are available. And those who need to go, thank you for being with us.